Hello and welcome to another booktube video from me, Lauren, from Lauren and the Books. And Minnie's in exactly the same position that she was last time, except no laying down, but I did still kiss her bum. David's just gone and thrown a wobbler into the bedroom because I've interrupted his watching of The American Office, which has taken over his life. And because the screen really reflects in my glasses, I've said, oh, I'll just turn it off for the time being. Did you come in? Tried to turn the telly round to face, where were you going to sit, David?
Yeah.
On the floor?
No,
at the table? But I said, do you want to wait? It's probably going to be about 11-12 minutes.
Well, for your information, I wasn't going to. I was going to play a game of FIFA.
Okay. Anyway, we're here to talk about what the books I've read so far in October. So far in October, I've read 6 books, and I feel like they've all been books that I've really enjoyed. There's no, I mean, it is only 6, but I've really enjoyed it, particularly the last 3. The last 3 were 5 stars. So let's start at the very beginning with Black Teacher by Beryl Gilroy. I don't have this book anymore because I've lent it to my mum. My mum was a teacher, she's retired, and I feel like she would quite enjoy this. This is a non-fiction memoir from Beryl, talking about her time as a black teacher in the 50s and 60s. So this was such a sort of valuable book to read in terms of black experience, particularly during those times, particularly, well, in a position of power, I guess, for Beryl. Later on, she becomes a head teacher. But yeah, it's a very... David? Yeah? You wouldn't mind closing the kitchen door, would you? I can hear the washing machine. Oh, thank you.
I think, of course I can't.
Oh, cheeky. Yeah, there is some of the behaviour and some of the language and actions that Beryl is victim to is just awful. And I know it was written, I mean, it's not, the behaviour and language is not excused at any times. And I know it was written in the past when I'm sort of more aware of things like that happening, but knowing what is happening nowadays as well, it made for really uncomfortable reading, but as I said, very valuable in terms of black experience. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I did enjoy the book. As I said, it was made for uncomfortable reading. Some parts I really enjoyed, like her sort of relationship with some of the kids and the parents and stuff like that, but there was sort of like an overriding air of like just winning everyone over, basically. She did a lot of like, oh, and this person thought this, but I did this once and then it just worked fine. And there was a lot of that sort of thing there. And I thought, the first few times I thought, oh, I'm glad that worked first time. And then towards the end, it was just sort of like, oh, so all of this sort of was just tried once and then that worked. So yeah, it just sort of, there was that was sort of at the back of my mind as I was reading it. But yeah, definitely valuable. And I think my mum will really enjoy this. And I think sort of, I read it for my book club, and people in that book club were teachers and were sort of amazed at sort of like Beryl's relationship with the children. Like one day they all just got the tube to her house and just played in her garden. So, and obviously that was like the 50s and 60s, I guess a different time in terms of learning, but yeah, yeah, I gave it 3 stars. Next up was The Cat Who Saved Books by Suzuki Natsukawa. This was just so sort of like warm and cozy and had a sort of like magical glow around it. It really like made me feel like the only way I can experience it, and this book is not Christmassy in any way, but sort of like the sort of warmth of Christmas that I feel when I think about Christmas is how I felt when I was reading this book. This book is about a young lad, Rintaro, whose grandfather has recently died and left him this bookshop, and him and a friend of his who he knows through school and this cat here, which talks, have to go on sort of like adventures or like missions to sort of like save books. So people who keep books really pristinely, like crimes against books almost. So like, for example, it's sort of like moral tales. So as I said, someone who keeps books really pristinely and doesn't read them and just keeps them locked up in a cupboard, that would be considered a moral, like a crime against a book. And people who rip up books and all sorts of things, and like lots of different bits in there. And like I said, it was just sort of very warming and very sort of like just lovely vibes around it. I gave it 4 stars. I read it while I was on holiday, and I had such a lovely time just sort of like laying back in my bed as I looked up at the Velux window over at the trees and things. So yeah, very enjoyable, very warming. This probably would make quite a good Christmas present, as I said, like particularly people, if you're like me, who like books and like books about books. It was very enjoyable. And yeah, look at that little cat. It looks like my mum and dad. When I lived with my mum and dad, we used to have a cat called Tigger, and this cat looks like Tigger a lot, so I like that too. Then next up, something else that I was listening to on holiday is an audiobook called Watching Neighbours Twice a Day by Josh Widdicombe. Josh Widdicombe is a comedian in the UK, and this is his memoir, told of him, of his growing up during the 90s, told through the telly that he was watching at that time. Now, I also grew up in the 90s. I think Josh might be slightly older than me, but a lot of the programs that he was watching and a lot of like the sort of historical events that he talks about, the solar eclipse we had here. Was the solar eclipse? Did it just happen here, or did it happen in other places in the world? Or was it because of the angle we were at? I don't know science, let me know. That, the death of Princess Diana, a lot of the World Cups that, or the Euro football matches when I was younger, they were a big part of sort of growing up and people getting behind that and stuff. So yeah, it was very nostalgic for him, but it was also very, very nostalgic for me. So yeah, it was really nice. And like, I find Josh very funny anyway. But also he grew up on Dartmoor, which is where we were on holiday at the time. So we were reading about him, for example, going and selling solar eclipse glasses down at Totnes Market, and like the nearest sort of town to us was Totnes. So that was sort of like an added layer. That wasn't planned, that just happened, that just sort of like seemed to align. And then at the end of the book there is an interview with James Acaster, who is another British comedian, who I really, really enjoy. He's actually the host of the Off Menu podcast, which I think I've spoken about many times. Co-host of that, and there was an interview at the end of that of the book with Josh and James talking, which I really, really enjoyed as well. So I think this is quite a niche one. There is so many on the market at the moment, British comedian, male British comedian books coming out, I guess in the run up to Christmas. But yeah, this memoir was sort of like, it really appealed to me because of, I used to just love watching telly in the 90s and like talking about Noel's House Party and Gladiators and You Bet and Big Brother. I was a massive fan of Big Brother, so all of that, like reliving that. I did a lot of Googling while I was listening to it as well. So yeah, if you're around my age and you grew up in the UK watching telly in the 90s, I think this is sort of like a must listen to. My sister's going to listen to it. She's younger than me, but she loves Josh Widdicombe. She listens to his podcast. So there we go. Then next up, 2 more audiobooks. I've listened to quite a lot of audiobooks this month. Empress and Aniya by Candice Carty. Anaya. I even listened to the audiobook, so I know it's Anaya. Empress and Aniya by Candice Carty-Williams. This is a small little YA novella about friendship and sisterhood, told about these 2 girls, Empress and Aniya, who are at the same school, both with different social backgrounds, and get thrust together. And I remember this well when I joined a secondary school 2 years in, because, well, boring alert, but my school situation where I lived, we had middle schools, and then the school that I went to was a senior school, I think, and anyway, I joined in year 9 and the school had been going since year 7, and I remember being sort of put with a girl who was like my buddy friend, and like the relationship of that, like that person not particularly wanting to be your buddy friend and having to sort of like are you going to be friends with this person for your whole of school? And that's what happens with Empress and Aniya. And then, as I said, they're both from very different social backgrounds, and yeah, and then there's a sort of like slight little witchcrafty bit in the middle, which makes them even more aware of each other's social backgrounds. And yeah, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful, lovely book about friendship and sisterhood and just like loveliness. I really, really adored it. I gave it 5 stars. I mean, you all know how much I love Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, so this wasn't a surprise. Like, it wasn't like I was going into this thinking, well, I'm not, like, I haven't liked the previous previous work by the author, or what's this author going to be like. I knew I loved Queenie, but yeah, this was just adorable. I also bought it. I bought it before I realised that it was available on Audible, and actually on Audible as part of my membership, so then I listened to it there, but I've got a copy of it as well. But yeah, I think it would make a great little stocking filler because it's only a slim little thing, and I think all ages would like it. Anyone who likes a nice story about friendship and sisterhood. So yeah, 5 stars for that. Then the next one was Girl, Woman, Other that I listened to by Bernardina Evaristo. I listened to this on my Libby app, which is my library's equivalent. I think there's a few. Overdrive is one, is another one, and yeah, I've got audiobooks and stuff on there. And this is sort of like from the library of unlimited audiobooks. So this one, like, quite often I have to go on a waiting list to wait for an audiobook, but girl, woman, other, you can just listen to it whenever you want, forever. And I'd read this book last year. I remember it well. It was when I was on holiday in Center Parcs, taking it with me, and that was like literally the week before the pandemic hit. So it was like one of the last normal things we did was go on holiday, and I had that book with me then, and I loved it then. It's a book about different people, mainly women, black British women, and their lives, and sort of told in different like little stories, but like with little like separate parts. I'm really tired. And explaining this is hard work, but yeah, different stories about these different women, and then all of them have slight like interlinking things, and I loved it the first time around on reading it, and knew I had favourites going into it on re-listening to it, and it was even more fun to sort of come back to it, seeing like, knowing that maybe this person was linked to this person, and oh, I remember that from there. And yeah, I think this is one that I'm going to go back to all the time. Bernardine Evaristo's writing, I loved this. I loved Mr. Loverman. Both of those books were on my favourite books of last year, and yeah, I just think she writes with such class and eloquence and like realness, serving realness, and yeah, I absolutely loved it. So yeah, really enjoyed it the second time round, and I loved, like, as I said, they're all sort of like interlinking, but the epilogue at the end where it all sort of comes together is just lovely. And then the last book I finished yesterday, and that's The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. Also took this away with me. It's a big old chunker, isn't it? I filmed a video earlier on this year where I talked about 5 books which surely were going to be 5-star books for me. So I went into this, like, and this appeared on it. And I went into this thinking I'm gonna love this, and I was absolutely right. I loved, adored, thought everything about this was wonderful. This is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice told through Mary, the middle sister's point of view, and it sort of it covers before Pride and Prejudice, during Pride and Prejudice, and then the majority of the stuff is after Pride and Prejudice, completely sort of diverted from the main character. Like, they appear, Mrs. Bennet appears, Lizzie and Jane appear, but like this is all Mary. The gardeners have quite a big part in this, as does Caroline Bingley. But yeah, sometimes when I was reading this, I had to sort of like remind myself that this wasn't, is the term canon when they say this wasn't canon? So like, if that, does that mean that that is the original text? So like, I had to remind myself that this wasn't Jane Austen's writing. Like, her portrayal and depiction of really popular and well-known characters is done so well, and not in a sort of like, I'm acting this out person. Like, it just felt like this was an extension of what I've read about Mrs. Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, or what I'd read about Caroline Bingley in Pride and Prejudice. It didn't feel like I have read, because I've read many Pride and Prejudice retellings. Last year I did Pride and Prejudice, where I read Pride and Prejudice, and then lots of other Pride and Prejudice retellings. Like, some of them I really enjoyed, but none as much as this. This stands alone, like, without even if you'd never read Pride and Prejudice before, it was fantastic. But if you had read it, don't be frightened of it, because it's so good. It's so good. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. Now, I remember Jen talking about this and her having listened to the audiobook of this, and I think this is one that she sort of like dips into in and out, and I definitely think I'm going to revisit this via the audio. But yeah, absolutely loved it. Thought it was fantastic, and going to be buying it for someone for Christmas, who I don't think one of my friends for Christmas who loves Pride and Prejudice. So yeah, loved it. Really good. So those are the books that I've read so far in October. 6 books. What have you guys been reading in October? Would love to hear. And yeah, say bye, Minnie. She's sleeping. See you all again soon for another BookTube video. Goodbye.